would like to take a second and to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk. My talk today is on study closeout procedures. My name is Tiffany Grimes. I work as a research nurse coordinator with the Clinical Research Support Program at UAB. And during today's presentation, I hope to give you an overview of the closeout process and the closeout procedures. My objective for today is to explain the purposes of the closeout process and to review and explain closeout procedures. I hope to shed a little bit of light during our time today on the who, what, where, when, and why of the closeout process. We'll start off with the who. Who all is involved in the closeout process. Some of this probably is a little bit redundant, but of course you have your principal investigator. He's ultimately responsible for the conduct of the study, so his participation is extremely important. In most cases, the PI is not able to be present for the entire closeout visit. However, it is essential that he be easily accessible and able to check in and meet with the CRA during that process. You also have the study coordinator. She's going to be the main liaison. He or she is going to be the main liaison for the closeout activities. Your pharmacy, in some situations, will be involved in the closeout process. Your CRA and sponsor, your account manager. There's a lot, in a lot of cases, this may also be the study coordinator. The main responsibility during this process is to ensure that all money has been collected from the sponsor. Also, your pharmacy will do the final drug accountability and the IRB. So what to expect during the closeout process? The main thing is communication, lots and lots of communication. At times, you'll exchange emails back and forth a pretty good bit. You'll also have at least one visit from your CRA or your monitor. Sometimes there are multiple visits. It just depends on how much data there is to clean up, how many participants you enrolled, how many regulatory files there are to be reviewed. Also, there will be a final drug accountability and an extensive regulatory review. Final data review is basically to ensure that all the queries have been answered and to ensure that all your CRFs have been completed. Lots of clinical trials use electronic CRFs, which makes this process a little bit easier, and it can be done remotely. This is huge because it cuts down on the amount of time that the CRA has to spend at the site and provides the coordinator with additional flexibility. Sometimes it's easy to overlook end dates for AEs and SAEs, so it's very important to pay close attention to this, to these areas when you are closing out your visit. Sponsors are usually very good about communicating information about dates of database lock, so it's very important to pay close attention to these dates and to make a note of them. As your study wraps up and the database is preparing to be locked, sometimes there are new queries that are submitted on a more regular basis, so you may end up with a shorter time between being able to answer those queries. If the clinical trial or the study uses paper CRFs, most likely the sponsor will send the CRA out to look at those CRFs more closely at some point during the closeout process. Your final drug accountability usually takes place with the pharmacy, or some places maintain their drug on site. So final drug accountability, you'll either return or destroy any remaining medications, and they will collect any drug accountability logs. This can be one of the most time-consuming parts of the closeout process, so therefore it's very important that you maintain an accurate and detailed drug accountability from the beginning of the study to ensure that this is much easier. essential regulatory documents for study closeout. So these are some of the documents that will be collected by the CRA or will be sent to the sponsor at the end of the study. It will include a completed signature delegation log, notification to the IRB of study closure, documentation of drug destruction or return to sponsor, your subject identification list, which will not be sent to the sponsor. That just needs to be kept in a safe place in your regulatory documents for easy access in case something comes up after the study has closed, and your final monitoring report. So why are essential documents so important? Essential documents are those that individually or collectively permit the evaluation of the conduct of a trial and the quality of the data produced. These documents serve to demonstrate compliance of the investigator, sponsor, and monitor to the GCP guidelines and with all applicable regulatory requirements. So in notifying your IRB, some studies use WERB. That's who we use for our industry-sponsored trials, so that's why I have them listed for this presentation. However, you would kind of go to your IRB's website to find out which documents are required. But for WERB, there's a one-page study closure report that you will fill out. And this form is completed when all subjects at your site have completed a final study visit and all follow-up procedures. The sponsor has notified you that the study is closed at your site, and all data analysis is complete at your site. All three of those things must be complete in order for you to submit a closure report to WERB. Please note that this may vary from IRB to IRB. This is some additional information about forms that can be used during the study closure, and it's important to document and to send any documentation that is provided to you by the sponsor to your IRB during the closeout process. Clinicaltrials.gov during the closeout process. Final data should be reported within 1 year of the last subject meeting his or her primary endpoint. If the study meets the following: it is an investigator-initiated protocol, and the PI manages the registration, and the results are required to be reported. If unblinding is a concern, then it should be completed 1 year after secondary endpoints have been met. If the study is an industry-sponsored study, then there are no PI obligations. It will be handled by the sponsor of the coordinating center. Your subject identification log. The purpose is to permit identification of all subjects enrolled in the clinical trial in a case that follow-up is required. The log should be kept in a confidential manner for an agreed-upon amount of time. Your monitoring closeout report. This is a report that the CRA will complete after her final monitoring visit. This reports the study is officially closed. The report should include that everything was checked and found to be complete, documents have been prepared for storage, outstanding issues from previous visits were resolved, and the resolution date should be stated. Lab samples. At the end of your study, you should pay close attention to ensure that all of your laboratory samples have been to the appropriate labs and have been tracked as necessary. So it's ensure that they've all been shipped. Ensure all logs for study samples are complete and accurate. If samples will be stored at your site, then make sure there is a plan for the storage and retention of samples and the maintenance of subject confidentiality. More and more studies are asking permission to store and use samples for future research. So it's important to have a plan for retention or for those samples as you proceed. So kind of backtracking a little bit, but where does the closeout process take place? It takes place usually at the investigative site, the CRO, and the sponsor. So it's kind of going on all at once. This goes with the communication as to why the closeout process is so important. If you have 3 parties involved, it can and sometimes will get confusing. So the site should be is responsible for making sure that they answer queries. They follow up on any additional money due to the site, making sure that all data is entered, arranging the closeout monitoring visit, and drug accountability. The CRO organizes the closeout visit, provides the sponsor with the requested information, assists with data cleaning, and follows up with the site at the sponsor's request. The sponsor is responsible usually for the final database lock, the final study report to the FDA. So when does the closeout process begin? So the textbook answer to this question is at the study completion / termination. However, the reality is that it begins at the beginning of the study. This is because all sites should be audit ready at all times. And if you begin to think about the closeout process at the beginning of the study, then your documents and your essential files will be up to date and accurate and organized at the beginning, which will make your closeout process much, much easier. So reasons for study closeout vary. Some are good, some are not so good. And the study completion is after enrollment and all study visits are complete. Sometimes studies are ended early for safety concerns, failure to enroll, failure to meet efficacy objectives, or study found to be infeasible. Safety concerns are a big issue. It's also kind of good to think about ahead of time so that you have a plan in place if this does occur. The failure to enroll, sometimes it happens. It's definitely not the ideal situation or any situation that we want to happen, but sometimes patient populations are harder to enroll than we initially thought. We've also, failure to meet efficacy objectives is also not exactly where we want to be, but with all research, something is learned, and it's better to figure it out at some point early rather than continuing throughout the whole study. And then some studies involve very difficult patient populations, and it's just not, until you get into the study, you don't realize how difficult it is to enroll those subjects. So what would you do if a study is stopped prematurely, and would you have you have patients on study treatment? In most cases, the sponsor will provide you with the plan of action, but as coordinators, our patients are our responsibility, so it is something to think about before it happens. Why do we have a study closeout? To confirm that the investigator's obligations have been met, to confirm that the site understands post-study obligations such as record retention, record retention based on the federal regulations. An investigator shall retain records required to be maintained under this part for a period of 2 years following the date a marketing application is approved for the drug for the indication for which it is being investigated, or if no application is to be filed, or if the application is not approved for such indication until 2 years after the investigation is discontinued and the FDA is notified. So record retention, as we continue on, sometimes the sponsors will ask sites to hold on to records for longer than FDA guidelines. This is okay, but it's not okay to destroy records sooner than the FDA states. It's a good idea to have an SOP for record retention and to have a standardized location for where your records will be kept. Generally, records should be maintained based on the clinical trial agreement. Record retention as we continue on. Your old records may be needed by the sponsor if they decide to file a new application based on part of the old studies. You may want to consider billing the sponsor for an annual study fee. So taking care of the patient. During this whole process, you need to consider how they're going to transition care. What does the study require? Does the study require that subjects be notified of findings or treatment assignment? And how will you transition them back? They've been, some of these patients are in studies for an extremely long period of time, and they're on a new or an investigational medicine that's not FDA approved yet, so it's not available to them after they come off study. So we have to think about how we're going to transition them to care so that they get put back on the medications they were taking prior to study, and notify them of their results. Sometimes it takes a couple of years after the study is over for results to be released, but we need to make sure we know how to get back in touch with them, and that's where the subject identification log comes into play as well. Now that you have, now that everything is done, it's time to pack it up and get it off your shelf. So it's very important as you're preparing to put these documents into storage for retention purposes that you pack up everything in an extremely organized manner. Label all the boxes very clearly with lots of detail. You want to remember that you may or may not be the one who is unpacking those boxes 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. So you want to make sure that whoever comes in behind you can pick up where you left off and know exactly how things were organized. And that is it. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.